Good afternoon. You're watching AB Live, a news-based chat show in which we discuss topics ranging from business, news, politics, and so much more. With about 15 to 20,000 cases reported worldwide and about 300 fatalities, the coronavirus has made headlines in the past few weeks. Today, we will be discussing the impact it has had on tourism, and for that in the set, we have Mathew Sliedrecht from Cleartrip. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Great. So Matt, let's start with what exactly or how big the coronavirus is right now as we speak today.
So as of today, there's been just over 17,000 cases, and the majority of those cases have been within China. There have been about 300 cases outside of China. And overall, if you look at the fatalities that have been caused by the coronavirus, it's currently reported at about 350 people.
Right, okay. So now, what are the major sectors that have been impacted by the spread of this virus, especially outside of China?
So we definitely have seen that there's been an immediate impact on travel as people aren't traveling to or from China. There's also been an impact on the overall economy. We've seen about an 8% drop in the economy within China as the markets react to this outbreak.
Right, so when you're talking about travel, obviously tourism has had a huge impact, but which are the major countries that have been impacted then?
So domestic travel within China is very, very large, but there's also very strong traffic corridors between China and Vietnam, China and the UAE. So UAE is 1.5 million people that came to the UAE from China last year. And then there's also obviously the surrounding Asian countries.
Right, so again, you mentioned UAE, so how we've been affected in terms of tourism, because again, we've seen a rise in Chinese tourists coming here to the UAE, and now with a lot of airlines being banned essentially right now, has that sort of impacted operations within this country? So
if you look at the overall tourism from China, it's a top 5 market for the UAE. So it's one of the most important markets. It's also one of the fastest growing markets that the UAE has. Mentioned before that 1.5 million people came from China. We expect that to continue to grow in 2019. Like you said, the Gulf's, the General Civil Aviation Authority, or the GCAA, which is the governing body for aviation within the region, has put travel restrictions on China or on airlines flying from the UAE to China. So there's definitely going to be an immediate effect on tourism in China. But we do see that as a very, very short-term impact. What we've seen, or from what we're hearing, is that they want to better understand what's happening in the early stages of the virus, and this is a precautionary measure that the UAE or the GCA is doing to help protect the citizens and the residents of the UAE. It's prudent to do or take this sort of action in the very early stages. But from a supports perspective, we continue to see the UAE with very strong ties to China, continue to support China in whichever way they can. Right,
then we obviously need to talk about the US then. How exactly is it going to impact the US? Of course, there are so many controversies and theories revolving around, you know, maybe it's like a bio-warfare or anything. We're not going to flame fire to that. But in terms of the impacts on the US as Cleartrip, what is it that you predict?
So, obviously, the situation with China and the US has been tense, to say the least, and there's been the trade embargoes and the continuing ratcheting up of rhetoric between the governments. The immediate impact, of course, there's going to be impact on tourism and the economy, but the economy has already been impacted with the trade escalations that we've been seeing. I think that'll continue to happen. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next presidential debates, and also what will happen within the Democrats as a nominee. So that will shape a lot more from a long-term perspective between China and the US.
Fairness, but this is not the first time we have seen such an epidemic, especially from China. Back in 2003, there was a SARS, and then we also saw that having an impact on the economy and tourism, etc. But it wasn't as huge as the impact we've seen right now today. Why do you think that is?
So if you look at the coronavirus, it spreads much, much quicker than SARS. And so there's definitely been many more people affected. If you look at the SARS virus, however, the fatality rate was about 9%.
Right.
For SARS, the current fatality rate is about 2 to 2.2%.
For coronavirus.
Sorry, coronavirus.
Yeah.
So while there's been more widespread of people getting the disease, there's been less as a percentage of people who've been affected or fatally affected.
Yeah.
So generally, virus has been spread, been governments within China, and also very vigilant with communicating with outside governments as well. So they're working with the World Health Organization, obviously with other leading international bodies.
Right, but on another scale of it, do you think that because China's role in the global economy has become more prominent over the years, especially in the last couple of years, I'd say, do you think that could be one of the reasons why there is this entire huge outcry and there's so much talk about this virus spreading?
Well, when you look at the 2003 SARS virus, I think you mentioned it in your impact video.
Oh yes, the explainer, yeah.
Yeah, it was 3% that the Chinese economy worked as a global GDP. And in 2019, it was 17%.
Yeah.
So no matter what happens in China, it's a very, very important player. If you look at tourism, again, in 2004, only 20 million people traveled outside of China. In 2019, that's 160 million people, and we expect that to go to 250 million people by 2025. So it is a very important player within the global economy and for the global tourism perspective.
Right.
So short term, absolutely, but we haven't changed any of our long-term forecasts or even medium-term forecasts when it comes to travel from China or travel to China as well.
Oh, all right. Does it only apply to the UAE or?
No, I'd say most countries outside the coronavirus causing this from a medium to long-term impact. I don't see anyone changing their view.
Okay.
If you look at the US, I think there'll be other macroeconomic effects that may affect travel.
Right. So and now even in terms of the medical impact that it has had, again, there's so much panic going on. People are really getting scared to an extent where the sale of masks have gone up, and that's become one of the most profitable industries right now in just the last 1 week or so. Do you think this concern and this entire panic is justified right now?
So if we look at the immediate impacts of travel outside of the China to the rest of the world, so if we look at intra-GCC, we have seen no impact on people traveling.
Right.
We've also got very strong traffic corridors between Southeast Asia. We've seen no impact on people traveling. So yes, I think there definitely is concern for people for health and safety, but people are still traveling within the GCC from our data. They're definitely traveling to Europe, and they're definitely traveling to India and Southeast Asian countries.
Right.
From a prevention perspective, I think the standard rules kind of still apply. Wash your hands. If you're sick, stay at home.
Yeah.
I'm still traveling. Everyone at Cleartrip is still traveling. So I'm definitely not afraid to go to an airport. But we do take some precautions, making sure our hands are clean.
But these are precautions for any kind of influenza.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So from that perspective, especially at Cleartrip, we're not concerned about that.
Okay, so basically the concerns at this point aren't as justified as they're being portrayed then?
Absolutely. To be fair, would I fly to China today? Probably not. But yeah, would I fly anywhere else in the world? Absolutely.
Right, so now what do you think countries, companies, tourism agencies, all of these conglomerates need to do together to sort of just control the situation and stabilize it right now?
Well, I don't think fear-mongering helps anyone in these sort of circumstances, and that sort of thing can lead to widespread panic, which isn't required. Again, the Chinese government has been very proactive in containing this virus as much as they can, and if you look at there's been no reported cases in the last 24 hours of anyone internationally or any new patients internationally.
Yeah.
So we've definitely seen the slowdown on the spread of the virus happen very, very quickly.
Right.
So if your business isn't very or heavily reliant on Chinese tourists or from China, then yeah, definitely sit tight and it'll be fine. When you look at the global supply chain, that's a different story, how that'll affect shipping and the impact of shipping rates and the impact of trade and tourism within all countries, because obviously most of the world's goods are coming from China, and most of the shipping corridors are coming from China.
And the share prices have gone down of airlines, of shipping companies, freight companies, etc., right? Absolutely.
So within China and domestic policy in China, that's going to be very interesting to see how the government plays out in the next year and how they recover from this.
Yeah.
The Chinese economy has been struggling with the trade wars between the US, but there's a lot of opportunity with other trade with Europe and the EU, also with the UK now that Brexit's happened.
Yeah.
So there's definitely other strings that the Chinese government can pull.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, you think the impacts are going to be short-term and not long-term.
Absolutely.
But can I just ask you about Cleartrip then? Again, your business is directly impacted by tourism and the operations in China being one of the bigger players. How have you been affected as Cleartrip?
So short-term, our overall business has a very small parts of the business, so maybe only 5 to 10%.
Okay.
So that has definitely been affected. But again, with intra-GCC travel, which makes up the majority of our business, and travel to Southeast Asia, which again is a very, very large section of our business, that hasn't been affected at all. And we've got operations in UAE, we've got operations in Saudi, Egypt, and we've also got operations in India.
Right.
So across the entire business group, we haven't seen an impact.
All right, great. Thanks so much for those valuable insights, Matt, and thanks for coming here on AB Live today with us. So like he said, there's no need to panic right now, but you need to take all the precautionary measures. But you can go back and watch our explainer video from yesterday on AB TV to get more details on that. Thank you for watching AB Live. We will be back again next Tuesday.